What's up, beautiful people of YouTube? GRC here with another mouse review for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Gigabyte Aorus M3 gaming mouse. Before I get into it, I do want to mention a couple things. First, for each section of the review, there will be timestamps in the description box below. That way, if you want to jump ahead or even skip whole sections, you're free to do so. Second, from here on out, I will be including my hand size, the weight and dimensions of the mouse I'm reviewing, and a list of all the other mice I've used also in the description box below. Lastly, if you want to help support the channel, there are Amazon affiliate links down there as well. Anyway, enough of that, let's get into the review. First up is shape, and honestly, I was not expecting to like this mouse as much as I do. It almost feels like a more refined SteelSeries Rival 310 with some inspirational elements taken from either the Razer Death Adder or the Zowie EC1. I'll show you what I mean in a direct comparison, but first, a quick tour. Taking a look at the left side of the mouse, you can see there's a fairly large rubber side grip with what almost looks like sort of a digital pattern. And above that are two side buttons, and in front of both of those are 4 LED indicators, and those are for DPI. I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. Taking a look at the right side of the mouse, you can see there's another large rubber side grip, and this one actually extends even further. I have to say, when I first picked up the mouse, I was a little concerned with how rough and jagged the pattern on the side grips looked and felt. But I can confidently say, after 2 months of use, they detracted nothing from comfort and only added to the grippiness. Continuing, you'll see that mouse 1 and 2 are separate from the shell, which we like. There is also additional buttons to increase or decrease the DPI. One interesting thing to note is that the ledges on the left and right side towards the middle of the mouse are very subtle and almost non-existent. But the further up or forward you go on the mouse, the more apparent and pronounced the ledges become. It makes for a very comfortable shape and a personal favorite of mine. It's also worth noting that the hump is towards the middle of the mouse, meaning it should work for all grip styles. Finishing up the tour, here is the front of the mouse. And last but certainly not least, the bottom. Here I have the M3 next to the SteelSeries Rival 310, and you can tell from the top-down perspective, they don't look that alike. Yes, they do both flare out towards the rear, particularly on the right side. But if we flip the mice over, their similarities become much more apparent. You can see how they both flare out towards the rear, get a little bit skinnier towards the middle, and then interestingly, they don't flare out in the front. And this is unusual because almost all the gaming mice that I've used and tested flare out towards the rear, get a little bit skinnier towards the middle, but then they also flare out towards the front. If we take a look at the Razer Death Adder, you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, from the top-down perspective, these mice actually look pretty similar, but flipping them over reveals their differences. You can see how they both, again, flare out towards the rear, get a little bit skinnier towards the middle, and then the Death Adder has a very aggressive and pronounced flare towards the front, and the M3 just basically has none. It's these subtle differences that, in my opinion, make the M3 a much better shape. I said earlier that the M3 felt like a more refined Rival 310, and I think the main part of that is due to the thickness of the rear of the mouse compared to the thinness of the front. On the M3, the difference here is not that great. But if we compare the same parts on the Rival 310, you can see just how thick it is in the back and then how skinny it is towards the front. It's this difference that, in my opinion, makes the Rival 310 a worse shape and almost difficult to know who to recommend it to, because the rear would be for large size hands, the middle seems to be for medium size hands, and the front would be for small hands. So I'd like to see a revision come to the 310, but I digress. Let's get back to the M3. Now, it doesn't matter how comfortable a gaming mouse is if you can't aim well with it, and that's why the M3 is unique. Not only was it extremely comfortable for long gaming sessions, and I'm talking some marathon 9-10 hour gaming sessions, but I was also able to aim really well with it, making some of the best plays I've ever had in Overwatch. I also made it to mid-diamond, which I've never done before. I think it'd be foolish to attribute my climb in rank to just a change in mouse, but it definitely played a part. I felt more confident using the M3, like it was perfectly suited for my hand, and perhaps more importantly, I played more consistent. I think that's the important distinction here. I wasn't hitting these crazy Overwatch League professional sniper shots. I was just hitting the regular sniper headshots I usually hit, but now it just seemed to happen more frequently. I think at times it can be difficult to tell, well, how much of it is just the gaming mouse and how much of it is actually just me getting better at the game because I'm playing it more, and therefore my mechanical skill and my game sense are both improving. With all that being said, I do feel like I have a slight advantage when I play with the M3 versus any other mouse I've used. Almost all of that can be attributed to its excellent shape, and for that reason, it earns a near perfect score, a 29 out of 30. Next up, we have buttons and scroll wheel. Before I get into them too much, I want to give you guys a quick sound test so you can get a feel for them. Mouse 1 and 2 are above average, with minimal pre and post travel. In terms of stiffness, they're definitely leaning towards the light side. They almost remind me of a better Death Adder Elite Mouse 1 and 2. I do want to mention, for a short period of time, Mouse 2 squeaked, and it was pretty annoying while gaming. Thankfully, it did go away, but it still doesn't bode well for quality control. Unfortunately, the scroll wheel is poor. It does have a decent rubber coating and it is ribbed for extra grippiness, but the steps just aren't that well defined, and overall it just feels kind of mushy. The only saving grace here is that mouse button 3 is decent. Moving on, the DPI buttons are good and out of the way. I never had any issues or accidental presses there. The side buttons are just okay. They're definitely usable in game, but I found myself wishing they were larger and had less pre-travel. I want to wrap up this segment with button delay. Now, I had heard that there had been some issues with mouse 1 and 2 having about a 20 to 30 millisecond delay. So I tested it myself and basically found no delay. I suspect that the other reviewers' testing methodology was either flawed or they just had a defective copy of the M3. I was initially going to include and explain my own testing methodology in this review, but it ended up adding more time than I would have liked. So I'm saving it for another day, and it'll probably have its own separate video. All you really need to know is that I used the program Key Response and implemented a version of the bump test. I think perhaps the more important test or question is, how well can I play with it? And as you can hopefully see from some of these clips, I'm still playing just as good, if not better than I ever have. So I wouldn't be concerned about lag or delay on the M3. Overall, buttons earn a total score of 24 out of 30. Next up, we have sensor. The M3 is rocking the PixArt 3988 optical, and it's essentially flawless. Specification-wise, it lands somewhere in between the PixArt 3310 and 3360, probably leaning a little closer to the 3360 though. It boasts a max tracking speed of 200 IPS and a max acceleration of 50 G. There's really not much more to say about the sensor. In-game, it felt good and responsive, and it never spun out on me or anything like that. Overall, sensor earns a total score of 19 out of 20. Next up, we have mouse feet and cable. I was initially a little concerned about the mouse feet because when I first started using the mouse, they were quite loud and scratchy sounding. Thankfully, through use, their volume has come down a bit, but they're still louder than your average set. Despite this, the glide is actually quite good. I did a direct comparison with the Logitech G403's mouse feet and received some unexpected results. The G403's feet were quieter and slower. Now, you would think that the louder mouse feet would have a slower glide, since what you're probably hearing is friction. Anyway, it's just an unusual combination and something that surprised me a bit. Overall though, the mouse feet are good and earn a score of 4 out of 5. Up next is cable, which I found to be disappointingly average. It's thin, stiff, and actually so small it wouldn't even securely fit into my Zowie Kamade mouse bungee. So I would frequently have to reseat it while gaming, which was a minor annoyance. On the plus side, due to the material and weight of the cable, drag on the mousepad was pretty minimal. It might actually be one of the better choices for those without a mouse bungee. Overall, it earns a score of 3 out of 5. Together, mouse feet and cable earn a total score of 7 out of 10. Last, but certainly not least, we have tilt. Now, this is going to cover any of the miscellaneous stuff not previously mentioned that really stood out to me. So, my biggest complaint about the M3 is actually its software. It's a pretty poor offering and seems like something that has just been tacked on for the sake of it. It's buggy and you can't even enlarge the size of the program on screen, meaning you're stuck with tiny font. I also had trouble creating and applying a simple macro. The program just crashed every time I tried. Since I'm an FPS gamer, this doesn't really bother me all that much, but it's something to keep in mind if you do care about software. The M3 does have some RGB, but it's pretty middling. There are also 4 LED indicators that light up on the side, which is somewhat surprising to see on what I would consider a budget mouse. This leads me to my next point. The M3 retails for only $40, which makes it a great bargain in my opinion. While build quality doesn't appear to be the best, for $40 I'm not complaining. Overall, the M3 earns a score of 8 out of 10 for tilt. So if you've been keeping track, you'll know that the M3 has earned a total score of 87 out of 100. It has my favorite shape of any mouse I've used so far. That paired with a fantastic optical sensor makes it my new number 1. For me, it just has the best combination of comfort and accuracy. If they could improve the buttons, scroll wheel, and cable, they would have a real winner on their hands and a top recommendation. That might sound like a lot that needs improving, but it's not by much. The buttons are already good, it's just the scroll wheel and cable that need the most work. The software actually has a lot of room for improvement too, but frankly, that doesn't matter to me as much. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you found it helpful or at least entertaining. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to leave them below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.